All right, so before we jump in, I just want to quickly go over what React is, how it works, and why we would want to use it. So React is a client-side JavaScript library, and you may have often heard to it referred to as a framework, and I'll go over why in the next slide. Now, when I say client-side, I mean that it runs on the user's machine. It runs in the browser rather than on the server, and it allows us to create really fast and dynamic front-end applications and user interfaces. So it was created and it's maintained by Facebook. It's component-based, meaning every piece of your front-end interface or your application is going to be an individual component, and I'm going to go over components in a few minutes. It's also the most popular framework in the industry. Notice I said framework and not library. That's because it's a direct competitor to other frameworks like Angular and Vue.js. So technically, like I said, it's a library, and the reason for that is because it's more bare bones than other frameworks. For instance, it doesn't include a router, it doesn't include an HTTP client like, let's say, Angular does. However, you can install things very easily. There's a very popular React router that we can install. We can use the Fetch API or Axios for HTTP calls. So at its core, it's much more comparable to a front-end framework like Angular than a JavaScript library like jQuery. It's really nothing like jQuery. So most people do refer to it as a framework. And the main three frameworks, at least right now in 2019, are React, Vue.js, and Angular. All right, so why would we want to learn and use React? First off, it allows you to build very powerful applications on the front end, and we can easily implement things like routing, which traditionally was done on the server. We can make requests to our backend services and update only certain parts of the user interface rather than having to just reload the entire page. This makes applications really dynamic. Another reason is code organization. Everything is built in an individual component as opposed to some large monolithic app where you just have a bunch of HTML and separate JavaScript. Components are also reusable, and that can be in the same app as well as using them in other applications. React is very lightweight and fast. It makes writing JavaScript apps much easier with less code. When you create user interfaces with vanilla JavaScript, it can get pretty messy, and you just have a ton of code to write to manipulate the DOM. Whereas with React, it uses something called a virtual DOM, and it makes things much easier. React is also very popular in the industry, so it'll help you get a job as a web developer. All right, so I just want to quickly go over components because they're essential not only to React but to any front-end framework. If you've never used a framework, you're probably used to just creating a bunch of HTML, JavaScript, and CSS files that are all separate. With React, we look at each piece of the user interface as an individual component, and I have over here on the right our second project, which is the contact keeper. This is the dashboard page, and I just outline the different components so you can see how things are broken up. So basically we have a nav bar at the top, we have a contact form component on the side, we have a filter component here, we have the contacts component, and within that we have the contact item components. Okay, so we can embed components within each other. We also have a spinner, which will only show as the contacts are being fetched from the back end. Okay, so some components will show at certain times, and it just makes everything organized and very dynamic. We can also pass in properties into components. They can also have their own state. They can also get state from, if we're using Redux or context, any kind of app level state. Okay, so it just makes things very organized. So I just wanted to go over what React is, what it's used for. So in the next video, we're going to go ahead and get set up with our environment, and then we'll get started.